Happy Friday and welcome everyone. We're just giving it a moment for all of our podcast community to get admitted into this Zoom virtual room for today's intentional conversations. And as per usual, please take to the chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. If you feel inclined to share any other information about yourself, we certainly would value that, including if you want to share your LinkedIn information. That's your way of letting us know that you desire to connect beyond this window of time. And we love those connections. Hello, hello. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. I am Dr. Nika White. I serve as the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and we are very excited to host you today for Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, and leadership in business. Amsterdam is being represented, Columbus, Ohio. We have North Carolina represented today, Greenville, Dallas, Texas. Awesome. Wherever you're joining from, we're glad to have you. I'd like to just remind you that if you are returning, you know that cameras are encouraged, but they certainly aren't required. We love to see smiling faces, but if you're here just in auditory capacity, then we welcome you nonetheless. I invite you to use the chat today for creating that sense of community. If you hear something today that really resonates with you, then share your thoughts and your sentiments. If you have a resource that comes to mind that you feel like this broader community would gain value from, we want you to share it into the chat. We value all learning, and I know that this is an environment where we often learn with and from each other, so we're very grateful. Once again, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast. Welcome. Okay, for those of you who have just joined us, I want to welcome you again. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this is Intentional Conversations, a vodcast where we discuss and intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and belonging. And we bring on a guest co-host that's a practitioner in this space to really help us unpack some of those terms. And we're so grateful that today you all have joined us, and we know that you are in for a treat for very rich conversation. I want to acknowledge the fact that not only do we have Intentional Conversations as a podcast, but we also do take the audio and we make the sessions available in a podcast capacity as well. So for those who like to get your content in that fashion, we want you to make sure that you are checking out our podcast wherever you like to get your podcast from. On October the 10th, earlier this week, we were honoring Indigenous Peoples Day. And so I want to take a moment just to recognize that. I hope that you all found some time to really honor this community. And we're so glad that there is a day of recognition. But I always say, let's not just make it a day. Let's make sure that we're continuing to support the most marginalized, the most vulnerable among us. Now, if you are returning to NWC's Intentional Conversation, you know that we like to give you a heads up for what you can expect in upcoming weeks. And so Friday, October 21st, we are welcoming Lisa M. Onk. And in that Intentional Conversations, we're going to be discussing Asian Americans in the workplace, how to grow the AAPI talent bench, and how we are addressing the model minority myth. And so we hope that you will join us on April 21st and help us to welcome Lisa. On October 28th, we have Jen Tardy that's going to be joining us. And Jen is actually returning to our vodcast. She has joined us before, but she has a new product out, and I can't wait to engage with her about this new product. We're going to be discussing what she has coined LEQ, Lived Experience Intelligence. And it really is a great tool that I know you are going to find value in knowing about. So we look forward to welcoming Jen Tardy on October the 28th. Now, we are now booking for Q1 of 2023 for our Intentional Conversations podcast. And if you have a co-host in mind, we want you to let us know. We would love to be able to connect with that individual. And so you can send your recommendations to my colleague, Amora Carter, and her email is simply amora@nikawhite.com. Now, I am so excited today because I have an opportunity of sharing with you, to this podcast community, a very rich conversation that I had earlier this week with Dr. Tana M. Session. And so while normally all of our guest co-hosts are here with us live, Tana actually had a conflict. And so we had to record it earlier this week. But nonetheless, we are bringing it to you exclusively for the first time to this community. And so as we sit back together and kind of listen and watch this conversation unfold, I want you to be thinking about what's coming up for you. And then we're going to spend a couple minutes towards the end just processing together. And so I hope you enjoy this. As I normally do, I want to read her official bio because she is very deserving of that. And so I'm going to do so at this time. Dr. Tana M. Session is the CEO and founder of TanaMSession.com, a certified woman minority business enterprise with over 30 years of human resources experience. Dr. Session specializes in cultural engineering, facilitated experiences, and leadership and organizational development. She has spent 10 years as the top HR executive for both domestic and international organizations, where she led various change initiatives and up-leveled entire departments, including talent, systems, and infrastructure. She has partnered with high-tech startups and fast-growth companies, as well as McDonald's, Xerox, Creed Perfumery, Interscope, A&M Records, Spotify, Hooray, Federal Executive Board, Department of Health and Human Services, Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, NASA, and many other multinational for-profit and not-for-profit organizations and government agencies. Her experience has enabled her to embed her passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything she develops and implements. Dr. Session was selected as the winner of the 2022 Los Angeles Awards in the category of Human Resources Consulting. She is also an international speaker who has spoken at the professional events throughout US, as well as Bangkok, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Jamaica. In 2022, she was accepted into law school, where her focus will be civil rights law. We talk a little bit about that. She is also the author of multiple books, including the #1 bestseller, Get Your Career Life in Order, and released her newest book, Working While Black, A Woman's Guide to Stop Being the Best Kept Secret. So VodCast community, I hope that you will find a way to help me to acknowledge the appreciation we have for Dr. Tana being here with us today. And I am actually going to turn my camera off while we together just enjoy this rich conversation that she and I had earlier this week, but bringing it live to you today. And then we will follow up with some discussion among this community. Thank you. Okay, we have just read your bio, as I normally do, and it's always a great opportunity for us to learn more about your accolades, your credentials, how you show up to this work and to this space. But Tana, I also want to give you an opportunity just to greet this audience in your own way. And you may feel inclined to share perhaps some other facts about yourself, but maybe some interesting facts that we would not know by reading your bio. Sometimes our guests will share intersecting identities, but anything that you would love to deposit into this audience to help us to know more about you. I want to give you that space and time to do so right now. Welcome.
Thank you, Nika. I appreciate that. And I'm really excited to be here and talk to you today and to your audience. I like to tell people, first and foremost, I'm a wife and a mother, right? Like, those aren't things that are necessarily on my bio, but those are part of who I am, how I show up in the world. I carry them with me everywhere I go. And oftentimes we'll tell people I do a better job at them some days than others, but luckily they're forgiving people. So I have a son. He's just turned 27. I have a bonus son who's 31. And then my husband and I have been here in LA, empty nesters since 2013 and living our fabulous best life.
I love that. I'm also an empty nester. My husband and I, we often get questions like, well, do you miss the kids? And I'm like, of course I miss them, but not to the point where I want them to come back necessarily, right? I'm like, this is working for us. And so, yeah, let's keep it going.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So Tana, what I love specifically is that, so often when we're asked about ourselves, we talk about what we do, and it's
Yeah.
not necessarily at the top of our list that we will mention elements like I'm a parent, I'm a wife, I'm a spouse, and I think that's so important because it helps us to really dig deep and to recognize that we are more than the work that we do, right?
Right.
And so thank you for sharing a little bit more with us. So it is Global Diversity Awareness Month, first and foremost. And so I definitely want to acknowledge that. And let's just delve right into this topic. So what are some ways in which people are or they can support Global Diversity Awareness Month? And let's talk about it at an individual level and then maybe from an organizational perspective. What are you suggesting to people?
Well, one of the things I suggest on an individual level is that we look around ourselves and see who do we surround ourselves with, right? Like I tell people, I challenge them when I do trainings, think about the top 3 to 5 people you spend the most time with outside of your immediate family and kind of do a checklist to see what boxes do they check. And if they all kind of fit in the same box as you, then you lack diversity in your immediate social network. And oftentimes that's going to relate to us having some level of bias or stereotypes or attitudes about people that we aren't familiar with. So I like to surround myself with people of all different backgrounds and different experiences. And, they're not all parents and they're not all women, they're not all wives, like all of those things help me in terms of my broadening of my own understanding of diversity. On an organizational level, I would say we need to continue to talk about this just as we do any other important goals or parts of the strategy that the organization may have. If D&I or DEIB or whichever you call it at your organization, if it's not part of that conversation, then it's performative, point blank, period. It needs to be at the forefront. It needs to be spoken on the lips of leaders all the time. It needs to be something that they're thinking about all the time, and also communicating back out to the employees what they're doing about it.
No, I love that. Thank you. So there's responsibilities both at the individual level as well as at the organizational level. Wanted to bring that into the conversation at the start, because again, this is the month that we're in. And while we don't need to just relegate this mindset and this way of thinking to this month, it is an opportunity for us just to further highlight and amplify the need for us to further our cultural intelligence and humility. So I love that. So I want you to share your story with us. How did you get into this space? And what are some of the motivating factors that keeps you connected to this work? So give us your journey into this work. Yeah.
So from a professional level, as you saw in my bio, I've been in HR for over 30 years. I've been doing this work in diversity since 2007. And I like to remind people that was the time when the first millennials started entering the workforce. It was right before the financial crisis. And I was in charge of developing a recruitment strategy for this management consulting company. And the CEO was very specific about wanting to hire, first-time workers, like new graduates. And I realized going onto campuses, and this was in New York, that the questions they were asking were different. Their expectations of employers were different. Even the types of benefits that they wanted were completely different. Like I had never thought about pet insurance before I started working with millennials. And so that really kind of opened my horizons, if you will, into the diversity of the workforce from a generational perspective. And now, how do we now bring them in and make them feel like they're included and that their voices are heard and appreciated and valued, like all of those things. And then from there, I really started getting more and more vested in doing diversity work across different aspects. We started looking at women in leadership and what that needs to look like, and how do we do succession planning, all of those things. But the conversations then are not what they are now. And I tell people, when I think about why I wanted to do diversity work, is because I didn't want people to have the same experiences that I did as a Black woman trying to climb the corporate ladder or lattice or whatever they call it these days, the monkey bar, trying to climb like all of these different paths to create a place of success for me where I could be my true authentic self. I could be paid fairly and equitably compared to my peers, like all of these things that I was missing. And those conversations weren't happening. Organizations weren't comfortable having those conversations. It made them very uncomfortable. And I remember I would tell people now, and early in HR, we told people, the employees, you don't talk about race, politics, or religion in the workplace. Now we're talking about those things because we realize that if you're saying people should be their whole selves, that's part of who they are as well.
Yeah, and we're surrounded by all of those things. And so if we believe that what's happening outside of the four walls of organizations is not impacting how in which people are showing up to the organization, how in which they are interacting, making decisions, building relationships, then we are misguided. And so I do love the fact that there's a greater appetite for the conversation, but it's still not always easy. So that's where, our work continues to be really important, right? So I love that. And I want to just acknowledge that we have an audience of folks that's going to be getting this content from a podcast perspective. And so you are wearing a shirt, and we talked about your shirt before we went live today, and it says, "A Black girl will save the world." I just had to amplify that. A Black girl will save the world. I agree.
You better believe it.
Yes. And I definitely believe it. Okay, so let's talk about the DEIB challenges that employees are experiencing. There are many, but I want to specifically put it in the context of post George Floyd and his murder, right? So what are we seeing are still some of the big challenges that organizations are having to navigate, specifically from the employee perspective, the marginalized employee perspective?
Yeah, I think, there's still a talent pipeline issue, right? The talent is there. The organizations are still trying to figure out where to find them, right? And that's one of the things I hear from a lot of my clients. They'll ask me for different resources, and I've collected and curated tons and tons of resources over the years that I share with them. And I'm like, go fishing, right? So that means that your recruitment is probably going to slow down if you're being intentional and you're really trying to diversify where you're looking for talent, and you're fostering relationships in associations or organizations that you hadn't before to get in front of their members or their alumni or their, different organizations. So that's going to mean that your time to fill may take a little longer. So helping them understand, like, this is a change management process. At the end of the day, that's what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. If you're really strategic about it, it really is. It's a change management process from an organizational development perspective. So you need to have some targets. You need to have some KPIs. You need to have some timing and some goals. You need to also be able to track that and measure that, and then communicate it back out. So that way you're holding yourselves accountable, but also letting the employees know where the changes are happening, because they may not have full visibility or transparency to be able to see it in their everyday work. So I think that's some of the challenges that organizations are still having. And to your point, here we are, 30 plus months out from, June or May rather of 2020. And some things are just starting to happen, right? So I think people expect immediacy, and some things did happen pretty quickly. But if you're being, again, intentional and not performative, and you're being strategic, and you're not just checking a box, it is going to take time. It took us all these years to get to where we are right now. We have this conversation, right? I said, I've been doing this since 2007. We're just having real conversations around diversity.
Yeah, so you mentioned that your start into this work was back in 2007. That's really, before DEI became sexy and interesting, right? So that was when the hard work was really, 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 really hard. Oh, yes. And while it still has this complexity, of course, I do believe that simply because more people they have an increased appetite for the conversation, it makes it a bit easier, but not too much so. But yeah, so to your point, yes, change management is huge. And you start talking about KPIs and measurement. It reminds me of this past Friday when we had a guest on for IC VodCast, Lisette Martinez, in fact. And she said, we often hear the saying that what gets measured and tracked gets done. And she said, that's just only partially true. She said, it's not just about if you measure it, it gets done. It's measuring it, but then also holding people accountable through incentives and through performance management practices is what actually allows the work to be delivered. And so I thought that was a great reframe, and just wanted to bring it to today's conversation. So as I read your bio, I talked a lot about your strong history and work and experience from an HR perspective. I want to get into, from your vantage point, where do you see the intersection lies between HR, traditional HR, and then, of course, the role of DEI? How do you like to intersect the two?
I would hope that HR is no longer traditional. I would hope that it's evolved over the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, just because we've all been forced to do so. I think HR was put into a positive spotlight back in 2020, in a way that really helped them to secure a seat at the table. If they were being strategic, if they were being proactive, if they weren't just being transactional, and they were really thinking about the organization from an organic, holistic perspective. Now, if they weren't doing that, then yeah, they're probably traditional, right?
Yeah.
I have clients that, have employees, and when they meet me or interact with me, they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're not like the typical HR lady. And I'm like, what does that mean? I was like, I know what that means.
Well, we're going to unpack that in a minute.
Yeah, I'm like, I've experienced a traditional HR lady, I sat across from them and I'm like, doesn't feel right. So yes, it definitely intersects because HR holds the data that the diversity team, C-suite member, whomever is running it needs in order to be able to measure and track and create these goals and communicate it back out to leaders and get leaders leaders understand dollars, cents, and numbers, right? So we have to come to the table and speak their language. And we need HR at the table with us. HR is over recruiting, they're over interviewing, they're over onboarding, they're over performance management. All of those intersect with diversity. So if those conversations aren't happening, and I'm not saying HR should be responsible for diversity, so I want to be clear with that. I do think it should be separate, because if employees feel like they have a complaint or an issue as it relates to diversity, they may not trust going to HR with that because they don't know how it's going to be handled. Am I going to be retaliated against, right? So that's why you need a separate diversity council, committee, leader that's really over that initiative, and then having those conversations with HR.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate your perspective there. I'm sure you're keenly aware of the criticism sometimes that can show forth in these conversations around what HR is doing or what they're not doing, and particularly how organizations will relegate this work of DEI to HR only. Yep. And what I love about the perspective that you're bringing is that it's, there's certainly a lot of validity as to why there needs to be this connection point and intersection, but it's not only about the human capital and all the things that are associated with the human capital in the organization. It's also about just operationally thinking about how do we embed this work of DEIB really into the DNA of every aspect of operations, the procurement, the purchasing, the marketing, all the things, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so I appreciate that. So if someone were to come to you, and I'm sure you've been asked this question before, where should DEI live? Should it live within HR? Should it be a separate department? And I think I kind of heard where you sit on with that question, but I want to just ask it very explicitly. What would your response be to that? Where should DEI live within an organization?
I think it should be separate. I'm a huge proponent for that. Even when I'm working with clients, let's say they have a very small HR team of maybe 2. That's more than they can handle in their day job and still be focused on the human capital aspect of the organization. And so whether it's through hiring someone who's over diversity or creating a diversity council or committee that includes diverse members from throughout the organization, that have a passion for this, that want to learn about it, that are invested in making the organization better, in addition to their day job, there's ways to be able to pull it out of HR. But HR should be involved, as I said, because it intersects so much throughout the work.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to talk about your career path. And again, you are an award-winning, HR professional, but it didn't stop there. You also have now gravitated into this space of civil rights law. So tell us about that. And what do you hope to do with that as you think about what's on the horizon for you in the future?
Sure. So I've always wanted to go to law school ever since I took my first torts class in my MBA program. And I put it on the back burner. I wanted to get my son through high school, through college. So now like I said, he's gone. He's out doing his own thing. And every year on my birthday, I try to do something that challenges me, pushes me out of my comfort zone. And usually it's something that doesn't make my husband feel very comfortable because I'm like jumping off a cliff or something like that. And he's like, please stop. And I'm like, oh, I need this adrenaline rush. I need this rush, and I hold on to that until the next birthday. This birthday, I was sitting down and I was watching this show on Netflix, and it was Dr. Cornel West, some other civil rights and constitutional law attorneys, and they were just talking about the state of America through the lens of diversity. And in listening to them, I realized, I need to get my butt in law school because I'm like, there's work to be done in these streets, and I need to be a part of it. I'm not going to go out and protest. Yes, I'll contribute to campaigns and stuff like that, but I felt there was something more I needed to do. So on my birthday this year, I applied for law school, and about 6 weeks later, I got accepted. And I told the dean when they asked, why now, those types of things. And I said, the work I do inside the organizations is great. And there's still plenty of work to do there. But I feel like when my employees, and I'm going to say because I consider all my clients' employees, my employees, when my employees leave the workplace, especially those marginalized, underrepresented employees, Black, Indigenous people of color, women, they're negatively impacted by laws, statutes, regulations, policies outside of the workplace that impacts how they show up as an employee.
Right.
So it's great that I'm helping to create this place of fair and equitable treatment in the workplace. But when they go out those doors, they have to face reality. And so I, from a diversity perspective, feel like my job's only half done. So now I want to look outside, and I want to be the one that's sitting across the table from state, federal, city legislators that are changing laws in the work, that are going to impact the workplace, and really help them understand how that's going to translate to the employee experience. Because if they're really trying to create a place of inclusion and belonging for all of their citizens in their city, in their state or locale, how is that when you're missing this huge chunk of people that are going to be negatively impacted by this law? Now, Nika, that doesn't mean my voice is going to make a difference, but I feel like my voice needs to be at the table.
Yes, and I would beg to differ. I think that your voice carries influence, and all of us finding where within our sphere of influence we can help impact this work does make a difference. And so I love that you saw that as an opportunity and you wanted to intersect the work that you were doing within organizations with also your ability to influence bigger change, systems change outside of organizations. And, we all have to find our own path. We all have to really be convicted, be self-reflective, self-aware, and convicted by where should I plant myself specifically that's going to allow me to be able to have the biggest impact. And it sounds like you have very intentionally done that. And I wish you best on this path, and I can see it working even stronger, with the background of the civil rights law experience with your HR and the DEI, work that you're doing. So I love it. I'm hoping that others will feel inspired to create a path similar for themselves. So I want to talk about cultural transformation. How does organizational development at a company create cultural transformation?
Well, this is the prime time to talk about that, because everybody's culture has been turned upside down on its head since 2019.
Tell me about it.
What's our culture? We don't even know what a culture is anymore.
Exactly.
They're fearful of losing their culture. And I'm like, you're not losing it. You have to recreate it.
Recreate it. Yes.
Yeah. So if we're not already thinking about a permanence of hybrid workplace, then we're in the dinosaur ages of 2019.
Absolutely.
We're just not going to go back. This next generation, Gen Z, won't let us go back. And that's a good thing. Because they're teaching all of us what it means to shift and pivot a culture in a way that works for all employees. And that just means that managers, and I'm going to talk to my older Gen Xers, which I'm a Gen Xer, I'm going to talk to my boomers, they need to develop new management skills that fit the workplace, the future workplace, not the one from 2019 in the past. That's gone. We really need to look at it through the lens of, if that means I have to improve my management skills, my leadership skills, my coaching skills, so that I don't have proximity bias, because I'm favoring those that are in the office versus those who aren't, even though the ones who aren't are just as productive and, quality of work is just as good. Those types of things, that's the part of OD I think is really exciting right now. And this is going to be a great case study. I might have to go and get another, degree in it, but it's going to be very interesting to see what this looks like, a decade from now, as the Gen Y and Gen Zs are moving up into their own leadership roles, right? Gen Y right now, they're the oldest of 41 years old. So they're already in management and they're changing the workplace. So those are the things I think cultural transformation is going to continue to evolve until we kind of level set with what the new is. And then we'll see what it looks like the next decade.
Absolutely. Yeah, the distributed workforce certainly has a lot of us very confused. And also, I would say very curious, which is a good thing, because I think that we cannot be over curious these days, because so much is changing and we do need to be asking questions and not just thinking about where people work, but how they work, where they work. And that's not the same for every person. So yes, org development is a big topic that is going to continue to show forth in a lot of the conversations to come. So let's talk about creating an organizational development strategy where we are really fixing the gaps. We're finding them, we're identifying, and then we're solving for them. What would be your approach to that? And what are you seeing right now are the biggest areas of concern or opportunity for organization and those organizational leaders?
Yeah, that's a great and very timely question because I just this weekend finalized a strategy for one of my clients because they're looking to, go through a cultural transformation. And, first my team and I, we met with all the leaders first and we said, okay, let's meet with all the leaders and get from them, what do they think the culture is? What do they think the core values are? What do they think the mission statement is? And out of 12 leaders, none of them had the same answer. That's a problem.
That's a problem, yes.
Starting from the CEO on down, right? And his whole management team. And then we said, okay, now let's assess the employees through an anonymous confidential survey with specific questions around, cultural aspects of the organization, from communication to management and leadership skills, performance management, like all of those things, and find out from them where the gaps are. And there were some huge gaps there. The first and foremost one was communication. I think that, communication has been negatively impacted, unfortunately, in the hybrid workforce. So we have to be more intentional about how we share and delegate information out to staff so they don't feel like they're left in the dark because they're home, right? And then the other aspect of it was career development. And I think that's just an ongoing challenge in any organization is how do we develop the talent that we have and create, even if it's not a defined career path, but at least new experiences so that they are growing and developing. And then the other aspect was systems. So inefficiencies just in the workforce, right? Like we are doing things that are redundant. We're doing things that aren't value added. Things are changing very quickly and we don't know why, but it impacts our work. Like all of those things, I think, came through this particular client survey. And now the strategy that we have in place with, some initiatives is for them to go back and say, okay, based on what we've heard from yourselves and from your staff, here are our recommendations on a cultural transformation strategy or OD strategy, if you will. And here are the initiatives. Now, let's define what that looks like. Like, what is that going to look like in the next quarter or the quarters out until next year? What are some KPIs we're going to put around and how we're going to track it and measure it and report it back out? And yes, hold each other accountable for it.
Yes. No, so what I'm hearing you say is that it starts first as we're trying to identify the gaps and solve for them. It starts first with assessing, getting the data in. And, I find, I'm not sure if this is your situation, but I find that we spend a lot of time at NWC prepping our client partners to receive the data by viewing it as opportunity, not as right, wrong, good or bad, but let's see all data as opportunity. How do you like to prep your clients once you've done an assessment? Because we know that there's some things that are going to unsurface that sometimes is going to make people feel very uncomfortable. They're going to question, are you sure that's right? So how do you like to prepare your clients for receiving data of this nature?
Yeah, very similar approach. I let them know that I need them to understand that their employees' experience may differ from theirs. And that could be solely because they are in a leadership position. And the employees are, kind of boots on the ground and their experience will be different. And also tell them that, there may be opportunities where employees use this as an opportunity to kind of, turn the knife a little bit. Maybe they don't feel like I've never had an outlet to express myself. And I said, but those are hopefully the outliers, right? When we look at, the data, when we look at the open-ended responses and what are the common themes there, that's what we have them focus on.
Okay, so another question. How can DEIB practitioners increase cross-functionality and interdepartmental cooperation? Because again, we know this work does not only belong solely to the person who carries the title of Chief Diversity Officer, Manager, Director, or even like your HR professionals, but all of us have to own this. So how do you like to coach and advise those leaders of this work within their respective organizations to make sure they're building those strategic alliances and creating that cross-pollination so that we all are journeying towards a common goal relevant to DEI?
Yeah, so one of the things I tell leaders is that it starts with them. And if you think about the middle management level in particular, they have the biggest impact on whether or not DEIB will be successful. So it's great to have, upper leadership, let's say C-suite or senior VP suite, all on board, pushing the agenda, putting budget, people and resources behind the work. But when it comes down to the middle level management team, if they're not on board and they don't have buy-in, they don't see the importance of this in their job and within their own team, then it's going to die on the vine. They have the biggest impact because they have the biggest influence. They have the highest touch of all of the employees throughout the organization. So they have to be willing to walk the walk and talk the talk and be vulnerable and be transparent and have uncomfortable conversations and say, hey, I messed up, hold me accountable. I'm sorry I asked that. This is what I was trying to learn. Call me in when I say things like this, those types of things, right? Just again, being vulnerable and being open to teachable moments. And then also sharing what they have learned and what their experiences are, because at the end of the day, we're all human, regardless of our level in the organization and regardless of what we look like on the outside, on the inside, we're all made up the same, we're human. So, so that's where I think a lot of the conversations have to have. And that's where I spend a lot more of my time in terms of coaching and developing and guiding and creating safe spaces is for that middle management team.
Yeah. So help us to understand from your vantage point, what are you seeing that organizations are doing really well right now in this space? No names, but just maybe some of the recurring themes that you feel like, okay, it seems like the tide is turning a little bit here.
I would say what I call sticking and staying. And I remember I had a minister one time that said that about marriage. He's like, you have to be willing to stick and stay.
Stick and stay.
Stick and stay. And the same thing applies with this work. Like those that started back in 2020, let's say they revamped their plan or started a new one. The ones that stuck to it are seeing the rewards, the fruits of their labor now, 2.5, 3 years later. And it's going to continue to evolve and continue to do so as long as they stay the path. And understanding that it truly is a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. Yeah. There are going to be little sprints along the way, but ultimately this work is a marathon. And it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to evolve. And yes, there are going to be outside influences from, social justice or injustice that impact your employees, and you're going to have to pivot on the dime or create a new communication around it or acknowledge it or create a safe space. Like those things are going to continue to happen. And the younger generation are going to continue to expect it to happen because they're showing up as their true authentic selves, whether we want them to or not. And so
they are.
Yeah. So I think that's what I see in terms of the organizations that are doing it right. And that's, some of my clients and others that I, kind of follow and monitor as well.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about the looming recession and how it may impact the work that we do?
I feel like we're speaking it into existence. Unfortunately, it's like, stop talking about it, it won't happen, So
yeah,
really, I pay attention to, what they're talking about in the news, and I listen to different economists, and I kind of understand the ebbs and flows, I'm a Gen Xer, as I said, our generation has been through, as of 2025 recessions, and now going to be 6. And so, yes, there's certain times in the years of working where things have to kind of come down and settle and kind of do a reset, right? But I feel like it's not going to be like it was in 2020. I feel like it won't be like it was in 2008 either. Will there be some sort of dip? Yes. Will the housing market start to come down? Yes. Those types of things I think are just going to have to happen anyway because they're inflated. Same thing with prices, right? For food and gas and those types of things. In the workplace, I think organizations are being conservative. I see a lot of news about different organizations doing layoffs, but they also the ones that did a lot of hiring back in 2020, 2021. So maybe they're level setting as well.
One of the things that I've started noticing, and you may have seen this too, is like the sales cycle is now a bit more expanded. It's like people are being even more cautious, to vet different investments, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I can tell that it's taking a little bit longer to actually reach a decision. And it's because they are finding that there's probably a greater set of competing priorities that they're having to give attention to. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that may or may not impact our work in our space. And I'm hoping, to your point, people are going to stick it out. They're going to say, I have to stay right here and just stick to it, right? The stick to itness is really important.
Yeah, they don't want to stop and they have to restart either, right?
So exactly. You lose so much momentum. Yeah. Yeah. That traction is really critical for being able to stay the course. And so, yeah, it's so much harder to get back into the game once you have, this hiatus of even giving it attention. So I'm going to talk about your book. You have a book that's out, and it's called Working While Black, A Woman's Guide to Stop Being the Best Kept Secret. So tell us
Yes.
more about your book, and what will people gain by reading your book?
Sure. So I was challenged by Dr. Lois Frankel. I don't know how many of you will know who she is, but she's a New York Times bestselling author. She wrote the book, Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office.
Yeah.
And I was a member of the board of her nonprofit. And she and I was sitting down over a dinner, and she said, Tana, one of the things that happens when I go and do speaking engagements related to my book is oftentimes Black women will come and ask me about challenges they're facing in the workplace and how would I handle them. And she said, I'm hesitant to give them that advice because I'm giving it to them through the lens of a white woman. And I don't know what works for me will work for them. I understand that there's definitely gaps there. And she said, but based on your experience in HR and what you've gone through in your career, I think you'd be the perfect person to write this book. And I was like, what?
Well, and kudos for her for also having the wherewithal to reach that conclusion, because sometimes people don't reach that conclusion, and it can be very harmful. So I do love that. Yes.
Right. Yeah, definitely commend her for that. And so, I started kind of thinking about my journey and what were some of the things I experienced as a Black woman, as I mentioned, growing my career in corporate, and, sat down and just kind of wrote it out and, went back and forth with her on it. And I said, my story is fine, but I feel like I want to talk to some other women. It can't just be unique to me. And so I started reaching out to other women in my network that are, professionals in corporate America or entrepreneurs, and just saying, hey, what was your experience like? What did it take for you to get to where you are? And there were so many common themes of the things we experienced. It blew my mind. And I kept thinking, there's got to be a community here where we could talk about this. And so that's what I want people to think about the book, is that it's a community. Like, it's myself along with, I think 8 other women that share their stories about the challenges that they faced in corporate or in business, and how they navigated through them. And I put them under the umbrella of Stop Being the Best Kept Secret, which is my executive coaching program that I developed years ago. And in there, I talk about what it takes to own your power, your truth, your healing, your worth, and ultimately your destiny. Yes. And so each of us share the strategies underneath those particular, I call them pillars, so that others can learn what they can do or incorporate or perhaps use as an influence, if you will, or inspiration to navigate through their own challenges. But this book is not just for Black women. And that's the thing I want people to take away from this. This is really for our allies. We know our story. We know our challenges. We know what it took to get here. This is really for the allies, those who don't look like us, to pick up and read and see what those stories are like. They're true, authentic, raw, transparent stories. And I was fortunate to be able to include Swati Mandela because I wanted to get a global perspective. And she's the granddaughter of Winnie and Nelson Mandela. And so she shared from her experience as a Black woman, in Africa, in South Africa, and in some parts in Europe, what that experience was like navigating and growing a career. So again, just wanted to get those stories together under one umbrella, create a community where we can talk about those, and not just go home and cry about it, which many of us have done, myself included, and then go back and smile the next day. This is an area where we can really say, wow, first of all, I'm not gaslighting myself by thinking, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm imagining this, or maybe, no, those feelings are real and they're valid. And yes, there's microaggressions, and yes, you're code switching to fit in, like all of those things. And I talk about all those terminologies as well, including intersectionality, like all of those things in there.
Yeah. No, I love it. So very educational, also a really good book for allies. I'm glad you clarified that, because you're right. Sometimes when people see a title that has, women of color in it or women in general, then sometimes some audiences will say, well, that's not for me. And so no, it's very much for you, especially if you really want to be an ally to that really important population. So we're going to share it in the chat so that this community can take advantage of that wonderful resource. Again, Working While Black, a Woman's Guide to Stop Being the Best Kept Secret. I love that title, by the way. It certainly is inspiring in and of itself, right? Let's stop being a best kept secret. I love it. And you also have a podcast that I think is similar in terms of, the goal and some of the community that you try to create through your podcast. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's also called Stop Being the Best Kept Secret. It's available on all podcast platforms. And the first couple of years I was doing it, it was just my voice, right? So I was just sharing some inspirational or motivational thoughts, talking about particular things that were happening in the workplace. And for this last season, I wanted to bring in other experts. So back in December of last year, I was honored by Forbes as a Next 1000, where they honor different entrepreneurs that are
Yes, saw that.
thank you, that are making a difference in the work.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I started with wanting to talk to other Fortune 1000, Next 1000 women in particular who had these businesses that were making an impact in all these different areas, from tech to the, consulting, like all of these things.
Mhm.
I was able to, many of them, if not all, said yes. And so I was able to talk to all these different women that I've featured throughout this last season, that shared, how they're changing the world, what problems are they solving, who are their ideal clients, what are some of the challenges that they see. And it's been really, really well received. We're having really good success with the downloads, and encourage everyone to go check it out.
I love that. I love that, Tana. And so you mentioned just a second ago, as you were talking about the book, the power structures and how women have to navigate that. Particularly, it can be hard for women of color to have to navigate the power structures. So how do you navigate them, and how do you coach other women to do the same?
Yeah, one of the things I tell them is that it's important to understand what your no is, right? So sometimes we think we have to say yes to everything because we have to overachieve and we have to do more than everyone else, right? And those have been the things that, depending on your generation, maybe you heard from your parents or grandparents or guardians or older siblings. And so now what I encourage, and I coach, very high level executive women. One of the things I encourage them to do is to be okay with saying no. Because you can't do it all. And there is no such thing as work-life balance. That's a fallacy.
I agree.
Send it to work and you're going to be working while you're working, or you're going to be 100% into your family. You're going to be doing family while you're doing family. You can't do both, right? And so understanding that and those healthy boundaries is important. And then understanding, what are the expectations that have been put on you for the role that you're in, and having conversations with your immediate manager to say what's manageable, what's not, how to prioritize it. Because again, we'll get in our own heads, and I know it's happened with me, where we think like, if I ask for help, that's a sign of weakness. No, that's a sign of strength. And that's saying, hey, I know I don't want to struggle or waste time over here. I need resources, I need help, or, can I hand this or delegate this to someone else? So those are the things that first and primarily that I tell people to do, just to be able to manage their time and keep their sanity, and not feel like they're failing or that they're not being successful.
Right. I'm a big believer too of work-life integration or blend, not balance. And so I definitely hear you on that. So I want you also to talk about your upcoming LinkedIn Talent Connect Summit speaking engagement. I saw that out there as well, and I definitely want to give you an opportunity to speak a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. And before I forget, I do have a new course on LinkedIn launching this month, so I want to talk about that.
Yes.
So the LinkedIn Talent Connect Summit is taking place here in LA at the end of October. And they reached out to me and asked me if I would come and do a fireside chat with the Global Chief Diversity Officer of Goldman Sachs. And of course I said yes.
Of course.
So we're going to talk about basically accountability, right? So how do you measure success around DEI? How do organizations hold themselves accountable? How do employees hold their organizations accountable? What type of data should they be tracking? And how do they language it in a way that, again, doesn't feel performative, or, like certain segments of the organization are being tokenized, so those types of things we'll be talking about. So I'm really excited about that.
I love that. I love that. And so how can people learn more about that? We want to make sure we place it into the chat.
Yeah, so they have a registration site. I believe it's free. I don't think they're charging, but I can't remember. But the registration site is available at the LinkedIn Talent Connect Summit website. So they Google that, it'll take them straight there.
And the team is actually going to place that into the chat so that we all will have access to that. And yes, and let's shift and let's talk about the LinkedIn learning course that you just referenced. So you have a new course that's coming out with LinkedIn. What's the topic of it? And what can we look forward to?
Sure. So this really helps support the first course that I did. So the first course I did is called Uncovering Unconscious Bias in Recruiting and Interviewing. And well over 250,000 people have taken the course in the last year and a half. So really, really good results with that, and lots of still heavy engagement. And so LinkedIn came back and said, hey, look, we have a lot of our clients, which are the companies, they call them clients. A lot of our clients are asking, we've done the training, we've created a strategy, we have a diversity council, but now what? What do we do? How do we make sure it sustains, right? And I'm glad that they're asking those questions, because those are the important part of the marathon they should be looking at, especially if it's, 2.5 years ago. So the next course I created is called Corporate Accountability and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And so a lot of what I'll be talking about at the Talent Connect Summit is exactly what this course is, where we talk about what types of data should you be tracking, where does the data come from, how do you report it out, when do you report it out, how do you look externally from supplier diversity to the communities in which you serve and the clients and customers that support your business or your products. How do you ensure that that reflects who they are? So all of those things I peel back and also talk about performance management and tying that into some sort of metric for managers.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So corporate accountability and DEIB, is it already available or is it launching soon? Your next course?
Well, when will this air? And I'll tell you.
This Friday.
Oh, okay. So yeah, because the launch date is October 11th. So that's tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Perfect. So this audience is kind of, hearing it fresh off the publisher. So the printer. So yes, absolutely. Corporate accountability and DEIB. Want to make sure that you all can check that out. LinkedIn Learning course that Dr. Session has facilitated and is making available. And so we're super excited about all that you're doing. So I know we've talked a lot and we're going to shift a little bit and get some reactions from the audience. But before I let you go, I certainly want to ask this question. So Tana, what have I not asked you about today that you're having a lot of energy and passion for that you want to socialize with this community? I want to give you that space and that time.
I feel like we covered everything that's important to me that I'm passionate about, from family to being in law school. I'm midway through my first semester. Preparing for finals next month, and the book, and just recently did win an award with the New York City Big Book Award for Distinguished Favorites, the LinkedIn course, as well as the upcoming course that I have with them, and then the speaking engagement. So I feel like as we wind down the year, I will say I'm looking forward to a sabbatical. So my husband and I are returning to Africa this year for 2 months. We're going to do a tour of 7 countries. Last year, we did a tour of 5 countries over a month. So by the end of this tour, we would have touched 10 countries in Africa. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm like, I know no one wants the year to rush, but I do, because I'm ready to go.
I so love that. I so love that. Well, I'll definitely have to make sure that I reach back out to you, because I would love to hear some of your experience and see those are the perks of being empty nester, right? Yes. You can just get up and go when you need to. I love it. I love it. Well, best of luck to you in law school, and best of luck with you with continued success for your new release of your book. I think I heard you say that you've already sold maybe like 20,000 something copies, and the numbers continue to grow. And so that's just remarkable. And just thank you for your leadership in this space and all of the important work that you do. So we're grateful that you said yes to our invitation, and we look forward for this community to be able to connect with you. We'll be sure to share out your LinkedIn information. And so we're just grateful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Nika. It was really an honor, and I'm so glad I said yes. It was great talking to you. As I said, I've been a fan of your work as well, and continued success to you and your team for all that you're doing to help change this world.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to turn my camera back on, and I would love for us to just spend our last maybe 7-8 minutes or so just getting some reactions. Sometimes it's always just good to process what we've heard, how we feel about what we've heard, what are some key takeaways from us. I'd certainly have my list, but I just want to invite as many of you as possible who would like to socialize some key takeaways to do so at this time. So just feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and share. And we'll get as many comments and contributions as we can. Andrea, I see that your hand is raised, so I would love to spotlight you. and allow you a
Good
chance to
morning
share.
from New York. Yes, I just realized that this was pre-recorded, but I love Dr. Tana. Been following her and her HR in the news. I was very active on Sundays on her feed when she would go live. Her stories were awesome. I wish she would have talked about her journey in foster care, because I know she had another book about that. And I feel that everything that she's been doing in terms of putting her story out there and talking about navigating from foster care into her very accomplished career is super inspirational, important, and very necessary for many to hear.
No, thank you so much for bringing that to today's conversation. I too think I would have really enjoyed having her speak to that. So maybe we'll have to invite her back. Yeah, she's even more
Definitely.
amazing now in my eyes because of knowing
Absolutely.
that. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, any others, thoughts and reflections? I mean, there was so much that she talked about. I have my list here, my running list here of some of the takeaways that stood out to me. But I wanna get other voices in. So who would like to join in and share at this time? I'm catching up on the chat too right now.
Yeah. May I say something, Doctor?
Absolutely, you can.
Yeah, I just wanted, there's so much to unpack. I think that's maybe a big part of the silence here. Like, where do we start? But a huge takeaway from me is really knowing your value and really your place in the world and how and our pricelessness. I mean, not it's kind of to capture not so many words her what she did best and better than I. But yeah, that's what I'm going away with.
Yeah, no, that's really good, Alfred. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, your value to the world. And, what struck me is when we were talking about power structure, she said, understanding your no. We're so accustomed to understanding our why, understanding our yes, but it's equally important to understand our no. I think it helps to keep us focused on our why and our yes. And so thank you, Alfred. I so appreciate you being here today. Okay, we have time for a few more. Do I see any other hands? I'm asking my team to kind of help me out as well. Okay, Toki, yes, okay.
Hi,
Adding you to the spotlight. Hi, Toki, how are you?
fine, thanks. How are you? Thank you so much
Doing
for
well.
organizing and holding this space as always. One thing that she mentioned that really stuck out was when you were talking about the recession. I have some clients that are trying to get ahead of the recession by capitalizing on the innovation, and they're leveraging their ERGs because they know that diverse groups innovate better because of their lived experiences and what they can bring to the conversation. So from a diversity point of view, innovation, leveraging that to get it in front of the recession is important.
I agree. I think that's also where she mentioned that the sticking and staying, right? Because sometimes we'll let big situations like that cause us to not continue to stay committed to this type of work, but it's really important. I recall her also mentioning how hard it is when you lose that momentum to try to regain that traction. And so I'm hoping that for those who are finding maybe your DEI budgets are being reduced or on the chopping block or potentially there, that you can make an argument for, when it's time for us to really build this work back up, we would have lost a lot of momentum. And what does that say to our organization and to those who are key stakeholders in our organization? Thank you, Toki. I appreciate you being here. Okay, so with that said, we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to just extend an appreciation to every single one of you for joining us. Many of you are repeat participants of our podcast community, and we don't take that lightly. We're so grateful. I hope that you found some information today to be enriching and to help put you on a path as you continue to deepen your learning. And if so, please feel free to share this out with others. They can catch the replay on our YouTube channel, or also they can catch the podcast if they desire to get their content in that way. Wishing you all a beautiful and safe weekend. We hope to see you back here next Friday. And we just appreciate you being a part of our community. Thanks so much.